Harold Branson was a man of routine, and that suited him just fine. Every day followed a schedule: morning coffee with 2 spoonfuls of sugar, the drive to work, then coming home to a hot dinner prepared by his wife, Mary. In 20 years of marriage, their routine had barely changed, and Harold found a special kind of comfort in that. But on this cool October evening, everything went off track. He stepped into the house, set his briefcase by the door, and took off his coat, expecting to hear familiar sounds, the clatter of dishes, Mary's voice, or at least music playing from her favorite radio. Instead, the house was silent. Harold frowned. Mary was usually home by now, cooking dinner or watching the news. He walked into the kitchen and found a note on the table. "I'll be late at work. Don't wait up." Just a few words written in her neat handwriting, but they stirred an uneasy feeling in him. She's never stayed late before, he thought, placing the note back down. Opening the fridge, Harold saw leftovers from last night's dinner. Heat them up? No, he wasn't in the mood for that. He grabbed a piece of sausage, a couple of slices of bread, and poured himself a glass of water. The TV in the living room was off, but Harold turned it on, hoping for a distraction. A talk show was on, the host overly enthusiastic as he grilled his guests with rapid-fire questions. But Harold couldn't focus. His mind kept going back to the note. Why was Mary staying late? She always let him know if something was off schedule, but tonight her words felt short, like she was in a hurry or avoiding explanations. Time dragged. Harold mindlessly flipped through channels, not really watching anything. By 9 o'clock, his patience was wearing thin. The phone sat beside him, but calling right away felt like overreacting. She'll be home soon? Maybe traffic, he reassured himself. But as the clock inched toward 10, his confidence started to wane. He dialed her number. The phone rang, but no answer. He called again, still nothing. That's when he decided to try her office. A night guard answered, sounding less than polite. "Everyone's gone. Nobody's here," the man grunted before hanging up. A tight knot formed in Harold's stomach. Where was she? His mind first grasped at logical explanations. Maybe she went out for dinner with coworkers? Stopped at a store? But the longer he thought about it, the more his anxiety grew. He suddenly remembered that night years ago when he had stayed late at a bar after work. Mary had been worried sick, calling him over and over, but he had brushed it off. "Relax, I'm a grown man," he had told her. The look in her eyes, tears, disappointment stuck with him. And now, Harold felt the same way. Helpless and anxious. By 11, he couldn't sit still. His thoughts raced. An accident, an illness, anything could have happened. He started calling hospitals, morgues, anywhere he could think of. Each time he got transferred or received a negative response, the panic inside him deepened. "Maybe she's just stuck somewhere," he whispered to himself, but the words brought no comfort. By midnight, he was restless. He opened the kitchen cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, hoping a drink might calm his nerves. But after taking a sip, he only felt a stronger urge to do something. But what? He dialed her number again. Still nothing. Desperate, he even called Mary's friend, Susan. Her response was short and unhelpful. "I haven't seen her in days. Sorry, Harold, I don't know anything." Hanging up, he felt drained. The clock read 2 a.m. Exhausted, he finally collapsed onto the couch, trying to sleep, but his mind kept churning. Then, suddenly, everything changed. Half asleep, he heard the sound of keys. Harold shot up, his heart pounding like a drum. Someone was fumbling with the lock. Jumping to his feet, he rushed to the door. The moment he opened it, there stood Mary. Her appearance was shocking, to say the least. Messy hair, a tired face, wrinkled clothes. She smelled of alcohol and cigarettes and was barely able to stand. "Mary, what the hell happened? Where have you been?" His voice was sharp, but more out of confusion than anger. She walked past him without answering. Stumbling slightly, she headed into the living room and collapsed onto the couch. Harold shut the door, still processing what he was seeing. This night was far from over. Harold stood at the door, as if frozen in place. He watched as his wife, who had always seemed to embody order and calm, now looked completely different. Mary carelessly untied her scarf, tossing it on the couch, and reached for the TV remote with indifference. Her movements were slow and a little clumsy, as if each attempt to raise her arm required excessive effort. Still in shock, Harold stepped closer. "Are you going to explain anything to me?" he asked, his voice growing louder. Mary gave him a quick glance, her eyes gleaming either from exhaustion or alcohol. Harold, don't start, okay? I just need a little time to sit in silence. Silence? You call that an explanation? He almost shouted. I called every hospital, morgue, and even your colleagues. Where were you, Mary? She leaned back against the couch, briefly closing her eyes. I was with a friend. We needed to blow off some steam, you know? Her words sounded unconvincing, and Harold knew she was hiding something important. He sat down across from her, elbows resting on his knees. Which friend? Why didn't anyone tell me you were there? Mary sighed heavily. Susan, it doesn't matter. The important thing is that I'm here. You don't need to worry. His face tensed and his hands involuntarily balled into fists. It doesn't matter? You think it's okay to disappear for the whole evening and come back like this? Harold, I'm a grown woman. Don't act like you're my warden, she snapped. Their eyes met, and in that moment there was something hanging in the air, something more than just unsaid words. Behind her words was bitterness, accumulated over the long years of their marriage. Harold couldn't believe his ears. He was angry, but not just at her, at himself. Her words reminded him of those nights when he came home late, smelling of alcohol, and Mary tried to figure out where he had been. He remembered her reproaches and worries, her attempts to reach him, while he just brushed her off. And now, the roles had reversed. You know, this isn't fair, he finally said, his voice sounding dull. You always demanded honesty, and now you're hiding behind some kind of defensive wall. Mary, I don't get what's going on. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. Honesty? You want honesty, Harold? Fine, I'm just tired. Tired of being the one who always waits, who always forgives, tired of being your backdrop. Those words hit him harder than any shout. He knew her patience wasn't endless, but he never imagined she could be so burned out. Harold reached out to her, but she raised her hand, stopping him. Not now. I'm too tired to talk about this, she said, getting up from the couch. I need to take a shower and go to bed. He stayed in the living room, lost in thought. It felt like a cold shower. Harold realized their problems ran deeper than he'd thought. Maybe they'd been building for years while he was busy with his own stuff and she just tolerated it. But how could he fix things now? When he finally got up from the couch, he heard the sound of water running in the bathroom. Mary was in there, but her presence didn't bring him any relief. He felt like a stranger in his own home. Mary came out of the bathroom 10 minutes later, wrapped in a blanket, turning her back to the wall. Harold didn't say anything more to her. He understood that tonight wasn't the time for confrontation. He'd have time to think. But her words kept ringing in his head. Like a broken record, tired of being your backdrop. Harold lay down on the couch in the living room, but sleep wouldn't come. Time passed and his mind raced. What if she was right? What if he really hadn't appreciated her enough? How could things have slipped so unnoticed to the point where Mary stopped being happy? He tried to find answers, but only became more confused. When the clock struck 3 a.m, he finally dozed off. But his sleep was fragmented and uneasy, filled with images from the past. He remembered their early years of marriage, when they laughed, planned for the future, when he looked at her with admiration. Where was all that now? What went wrong? Meanwhile, Mary, curled up under the blanket, lay awake. Her words about being tired weren't spontaneous. It was the truth she had long been too afraid to voice. She wondered if she had gone too far with this small rebellion. But when she remembered Harold's face, his confusion and shock, she realized she had done the right thing. He needed a wake-up call. They both did. Gradually, her thoughts quieted, and she drifted off to sleep, feeling a bit freer than she had in a long time. That night became the starting point for both of them. They both understood that their marriage needed reevaluation. But could they find their way back to each other? Or would a break be inevitable? The answers awaited them ahead in the new day, which was already beginning to be tinged with the first rays of the morning sun. Harold woke up early. The sun was just starting to peek through the curtains, and the silence in the house felt deafening. He could feel the exhaustion in his body, the kind that only one night on the couch couldn't fix. Turning to his side, he saw the empty cup he'd left on the table the night before, and the events of the previous evening flooded back to him. All the emotions came rushing back. Mary was still in the bedroom. She rarely slept in that late, but Harold didn't want to wake her. Maybe she really needed the rest? He decided to make breakfast. It wasn't something he normally did. Usually, he'd grab something quick or expect the food to be ready for him. But today, he wanted to do something nice for her. Maybe it would help them start the day fresh. In the kitchen, Harold put the kettle on, sliced some bread, and cracked eggs into a bowl. He wasn't much of a cook, but he was trying. The sizzle of the frying pan filled the silence as he started making scrambled eggs. It felt like with every move of the spatula, he was calming himself down, giving his mind something to focus on. When the food was ready, Harold set the table. 2 plates, teacups, and a small bouquet he found in the fridge, left over from a gift a colleague had given him the day before. Mary appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes. Her hair was messy, and her face showed the fatigue that hadn't disappeared overnight. "You're cooking?" she asked, surprised. "Well, someone has to," Harold tried to joke. "I thought it'd be a good way to start the day." She walked over to the table and sat down. Her gaze swept over the plates, the cups, and the flowers. "That's sweet, Harold." "Thanks," she said, but her voice was still restrained. He sat across from her, trying not to make eye contact. The tension in the air was palpable. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Harold felt like an invisible wall had grown between them, and he didn't know how to tear it down. Finally, he decided to speak up. "Mary, I know last night wasn't the best, and I'm sorry. I probably did something wrong, but I want to understand what exactly." She looked at him, her eyes glistening like she was fighting back emotions. "Harold, it's not just about you. I'm confused. We've been living side by side for so many years, but sometimes it feels like we're strangers. Do you feel that too?" His heart sank. She was right. Their marriage had turned into a routine where each day was just like the one before. "I don't want it to be like this," Harold said, his voice trembling. "But Mary, I don't know how to fix it. Maybe we could start with something simple, like spending a day together." Her lips trembled, and she nodded. "Okay, what do you have in mind?" Harold thought for a moment. He wasn't sure what exactly they needed, but he knew they needed to break the cycle somehow. Then he suddenly remembered the park she used to love. They hadn't gone there in years. "Let's go to the park. Take a walk like we used to. We can grab coffee on the way, and just talk." Mary looked at him with a slight smile. It wasn't the bright smile she used to have, but it was still something. "Okay," she replied. An hour later, they were walking through the paths of the old park. A light breeze played in the tree branches, and birds chirped around them. This place had once been their refuge when they first started dating. It was here that Harold had proposed to Mary, and they had spent many of their happiest days together. "Do you remember this bridge?" he asked, pointing to an old wooden crossing over a small pond. "We stood here when I first told you I loved you." She stopped, her eyes glistening slightly. "Of course I remember. You were so nervous, you almost dropped the ring in the water." They both laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh they'd shared in a long time. It was a moment that reminded them they had something more than just years of shared life. They continued walking, talking about little things, reminiscing about the past. Gradually, the conversation moved to deeper topics. "Harold, I want to be honest," Mary began. "When you came home late, I felt unnecessary. It seemed like you were choosing everything over me." He stopped and turned to her. "I know," he admitted, "and I was selfish. I didn't see how much it hurt you, but I want to fix it. Please, give me a chance." She looked at him as if trying to gauge how sincere his words were. Then she slowly nodded. "Okay, Harold, but this is going to take time. We have to work on it together." "I'm ready," he said firmly. When they returned home, the day was winding down, but their journey had only just begun. It was a small but significant step toward restoring what had once connected them. Harold knew there was still a lot of work ahead, but he was ready. For Mary, for their marriage, for himself. That evening, sitting on the couch next to each other, they finally felt like more than just roommates. For the first time in a long while, they felt like family. The next morning, Harold woke up with the feeling that something important lay ahead. Yesterday had been a step forward, but he knew that one step wasn't enough to put everything back in place. He heard sounds coming from the kitchen. It was Mary. His heart skipped a beat. She never got up before him. When he walked into the kitchen, Mary was finishing up breakfast. Her movements were quick but confident, as if she was focusing on something to keep her mind off something else. On the table were already cups of coffee and plates of scrambled eggs. She glanced at Harold and gave him a soft smile. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he replied, trying to read her mood from her face. "You're up early." She nodded and sat down at the table. "I just couldn't sleep. I've been thinking a lot." Harold realized this was an opportunity to talk, but he didn't want to rush it. They began eating, and for a few minutes, the kitchen was filled only with the sounds of utensils and the aroma of coffee. "Harold," Mary finally said, setting her cup down. "Yesterday, we talked about needing to make changes. But I feel like I've been holding so much in, and it's keeping us from moving forward." He froze, feeling his heart race. "What do you mean?" he asked. She took a deep breath and looked him straight in the eye. "I think we need to talk about the past. About something I've been trying to forget for a long time, but it's never really gone away." Harold nodded, feeling the weight of her words press down on him. "I'm ready to listen, Mary. Whatever it is, I want to understand." She looked away, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. Then she began speaking slowly, as though carefully choosing her words. "Remember that year when we had the hardest time? When you were working late, and I was left to fend for myself?" Harold nodded. That was a time he tried not to think about. He had been so caught up in his career, and their relationship had started to fall apart. "That's when I met someone," Mary continued. "Nothing serious, but he listened to me when you were too busy. We didn't go far, but it left a mark. I felt guilty all this time, but I couldn't tell you. I was afraid you'd never forgive me." His breath caught in his chest. He felt a mix of emotions, anger, hurt, but also a strange sense of relief. Mary was watching him, waiting for a response, and he knew that his next words meant a lot. "It was a long time ago," he finally said, trying to stay calm. "And if you're telling me about it now, it means you want us to start fresh. I need some time to process this, but I appreciate your honesty." Mary nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, Harold. I really want us to try again. You're my family, and I don't want to lose that." After breakfast, they decided to spend the day outside the house. Harold suggested they drive to a small village nearby, one they used to visit often. Mary agreed, and they set off. The drive was peaceful, and each of them was lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, the village looked just as they remembered. Small shops, cozy cafes, and the old church on the hill. They walked through the streets, stopping into antique shops, looking at little trinkets that held stories of the past. In one of the stores, Mary found an old cookbook. "Look," she said, showing it to Harold. "This reminds me of when I first learned to cook, right after we got married." He smiled, taking the book in his hands. "Maybe we should start cooking together? It could be our new hobby." She laughed. "That doesn't sound bad, but be ready to eat all my experiments." Harold felt the lightness between them again. It was like a breath of fresh air after so much heaviness. By evening, they returned home, tired but content. Harold noticed that the tension between them had noticeably lessened. They sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, discussing plans for the future. "I think we need to spend more time together," he said. "Find something that's just ours, like today's trip." Mary nodded. "I agree. And Harold, thank you for listening to me. It means a lot to me." He squeezed her hand. "We'll make it, Mary. The important thing is that we're in this together." This chapter of their lives was just beginning, and while there was still much work ahead, they both knew they were ready for the changes. Their love hadn't faded. It was simply waiting for the moment to shine again. It had been a week since Harold and Mary had started opening up to each other about their feelings and memories. Those conversations were both healing and painful. Every word spoken out loud seemed to peel away a layer of tension that had built up between them over the years. But it was clear that words alone wouldn't be enough to fix everything. It would take actions, too. On Friday evening, after a long work week, Harold suggested something that took Mary by surprise. "How about we go to that cabin by the lake where we spent our first vacation?" he asked, glancing over at her from across the kitchen table. Mary looked up from the magazine she'd been reading and paused, thinking about his offer. The cabin by the lake was a place that had once symbolized their happiness, a time when they were just starting their life together, believing the best was yet to come. But the trips there stopped years ago when their relationship started to show cracks. "That's unexpected," she said, smiling. "But I think it's a great idea. We haven't been there in ages." The next morning, they packed a few bags with clothes, blankets, and food for the trip. The drive to the cabin took about 3 hours, and the road was peaceful and scenic. Harold put on their favorite music from their younger years, which helped set a light, nostalgic tone. When they arrived, the cabin looked almost exactly as they remembered. It was surrounded by tall pines, and the calm surface of the lake reflected the autumn sky. They got out of the car, taking in the cool, fresh air, and for a moment, both felt as if time had turned back. "Everything feels so familiar," Mary whispered, looking around, "like we never left." "Let's go inside," Harold suggested, opening the door to the cabin. Inside, the cabin still had its cozy charm. The old wooden walls, the small fireplace nook, and the scent of pine brought back memories. Harold noticed how Mary gently touched the furniture, as if checking if it was real. Once they unpacked, Mary suggested a walk along the lake. They walked side by side, sometimes talking, but mostly in silence, just enjoying the sounds of nature. At one point, as they rounded a bend in the trail, Harold suddenly stopped and looked at Mary. "Do you remember when we used to sit by the campfire here at night?" he asked. Mary smiled. "Of course. That was the night you tried to tell a scary story, but ended up scaring yourself." They both laughed, and Harold realized how long it had been since he'd heard her laugh like that. It was almost like medicine. Later, on their way back to the cabin, they spotted an old boat they used to use for lake trips. Harold suggested they fix it up. "Why not?" Mary said, her eyes lighting up with unexpected enthusiasm. They spent the rest of the day working on the boat. Harold was focused on the repairs, while Mary handed him tools and occasionally teased him about his ability to fix things. That shared task brought them closer again. As night fell, they lit the fireplace and settled on the old couch. Harold poured them both some wine, and Mary wrapped herself in a warm blanket. It was quiet, with only the crackling of the fire filling the room. "I've been thinking a lot about this place," Harold began, gazing into the flames. "About who we were back then and who we are now. I regret letting us lose what we had." Mary turned toward him. "We're both to blame, Harold, but what matters is that we're trying to fix it." He took her hand. "I want us to start over, Mary. I know it won't be easy, but I'm ready. You mean everything to me." Her eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hand. "I want that too. Let's do it together." They sat there for a long time, sharing their thoughts and dreams for the future. That evening marked a turning point for them, a sign that even after years of tension, they could find a way back to understanding each other. The next morning, they woke up early and decided to take the boat out on the lake. The water was calm, and the air was fresh and invigorating. They paddled together, enjoying the silence and the view of the surrounding nature. At one point, Mary started singing an old song they used to play in the car. Harold joined in, and their voices blended in harmony, as if bringing them back to a time when everything felt simpler. When they returned to the cabin, Mary suddenly stopped and looked at Harold. "You know, I think we've found each other again," she said. "And I'll do whatever it takes to never lose you again," he replied, hugging her tightly. That weekend became the beginning of a new chapter for them, one where they were learning to be together again, to respect and love each other. The time spent at the lake reminded them that even after the hardest trials, there's always a way back home. A few days had passed since Harold and Mary returned from their trip to the lake. The weekend they spent away from the hustle and bustle felt like a return to the time when their marriage was full of joy and ease. However, the real test awaited them back home, where their everyday life was ready to challenge the strength of their new promises. On Monday morning, Mary stood at the kitchen sink, preparing breakfast. She heard Harold coming up the stairs, and her heart skipped a beat as he entered the room with a light smile on his face. "Good morning," he said, gently kissing her on the cheek. "How did you sleep?" "Good," Mary replied, smiling. "How about you?" "Better than I have in the past few years," he admitted. This morning routine seemed like a small thing, but for both of them, it had become a symbol of a new chapter. Harold, for the first time in a long while, stayed at the table after breakfast to discuss plans for the day. He began to notice the little details he hadn't before. How Mary folded napkins, how she gazed out the window, thinking through her to-do list. Despite the positive changes, not everything was smooth sailing. Life kept throwing challenges their way. In the middle of the week, Harold stayed late at work. He arrived home around 9 in the evening and immediately felt the tension in the air. Mary was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the turned-off TV. "You didn't even call," she said as he hung up his coat. Harold sighed, feeling the pressure mounting. "I forgot, Mary. There was a meeting, and it ran late. I didn't want to bother you." "Not bother me?" Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of emotion. "We're just starting to rebuild something, and I thought you were falling back into old habits." Her words made him stop. He realized how fragile their new understanding of each other was. He moved closer, sat down beside her, and took her hand. "You're right. I should have called. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." Mary nodded but didn't pull her hand away this time. In her eyes, Harold saw a spark of hope, one he was determined to hold on to. Harold began finding ways to show Mary that she was important to him. He wasn't great at grand romantic gestures, but he started noticing the little things. On the weekend, he unexpectedly suggested they spend the evening cooking dinner together. They chopped vegetables, laughed at his attempts to follow the recipe, and that simple activity turned out to be one of the most memorable moments of the past few months. Mary, in turn, made her own efforts. She started opening up more, no longer expecting Harold to guess her mood. These conversations weren't always easy, but they became the foundation of their new communication. One evening, several months after their trip, Harold and Mary sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. They settled into old wooden chairs Harold had fixed just for her. "You know," Mary began, "sometimes I think about how far we've come. We lost so much time to resentment and silence, but maybe that's exactly what we needed to wake up." Harold nodded, gazing thoughtfully at the horizon. "I think about that too, and I'm glad we had the chance to fix things. Sometimes I'm afraid we might not have found this path." Mary turned to him and took his hand. "We found it, that's what matters. But Harold, I want us to promise each other one thing." "What's that?" "That we'll never avoid talking again, that we'll be honest, even when it's hard. And that we'll always remember why we started all of this." Harold looked into her eyes and saw the depth that had once drawn him to her. "I promise, Mary, and I'll do everything to keep that promise." They sat like that for a long while, until the sky darkened and the stars began to shine above them. That moment wasn't just the end of a difficult chapter, but the beginning of a new life. The house no longer felt like a place of tension. It had become a home, once again, in the truest sense of the word. In the months that followed, their life gradually stabilized. There were new challenges, but they faced them together. Harold no longer shied away from responsibility, and Mary learned to forgive and trust. Their friends noticed the changes and often asked them what their secret was. But Harold and Mary knew that there was no secret. Just two people who had decided their love was worth fighting for. When they celebrated their next anniversary, their home was full of friends and family. Harold raised a glass to make a toast. "To us," he said, looking at Mary, "for finding our way back to each other and learning to be happy again."